Hello everyone, Sandrone, otherwise known as Marionette, 7th of the Fatui Harbingers, is the one new 5-star character releasing in patch Luna 8, being the final playable character releasing in nod-krai. As the character right before Snezhnaya's release, Sandrone introduces a core mechanic that will be expanded upon in Snezhnaya, Stellar Reactions. But even without future characters that will very likely make her team stronger, Sandrone already looks like a top tier DPS even before Snezhnaya's release. So to see just how strong she is now and potentially in the future, in this guide I'll be explaining how Sandrone works, the best ways to build her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value, providing detailed analysis that is backed by TC, and including a bunch of pre-release calcs on Sandrone from multiple different theory crafters. Sandrone is a 5-star cryo claymore DPS who ascends with crit rate and is the first DPS that revolves around the new stellar reactions, specifically stellar conduct, cryo plus electro. Just like how the lunar reactions work, Sandrone has a passive that enables your team to trigger stellar conduct instead of superconduct. She also buffs the base damage of the reaction by 14% with at least 2000 attack, and Sandrone will also enter the radiant stellar conduct state when she's in something called a pole star field, which are both important mechanics that directly involve the stellar conduct reaction. So let's first go over the details of what stellar conduct does. Normally, when you apply cryo and electro on an enemy, you trigger superconduct, which does AoE cryo damage and decreases the enemy's physical res by 40% for 12 seconds. Stellar conduct, on the other hand, is much different. Triggering the reaction doesn't deal any damage, but instead spawns a starlight prism, which creates a large zone called a pole star field for 5 seconds, with the duration getting refreshed when the reaction is triggered again. While in the pole star field, certain characters, specifically ones that revolve around stellar conduct, will enter the radiant stellar conduct state, which activates important bonuses within their kits. In addition, enemies in the field will have their physical res reduced by 40%. And lastly, the team will gain a stacking cryo and electro damage percent buff and an increased multiplier for stellar conduct damage, scaling with the amount of cryo and electro application on enemies every 4 seconds. For every 4-second interval the pole star field is active, the game will track the amount of cryo and electro application applied by your team and give your team stacks based on the amount of application. Based on current knowledge, it looks like one cryo or electro application gives 1 stack. However, it was also observed that cryo and electro swirl also give a stack in single target, even though that doesn't apply an element, so post-release testing is needed to fully understand the stack generation mechanic. But whatever the case may be, the amount of stacks translates to a team-wide cryo and electro damage percent buff and a unique multiplier for stellar conduct damage that goes into the stellar base multiplier section in its damage formula. Now, the stellar conduct reaction itself doesn't deal damage, but certain characters can deal direct stellar conduct damage with their abilities, which is what this damage formula applies to. Cryo character stellar conduct damage will be cryo damage, and electro character stellar conduct damage will be electro damage. This damage formula follows the same structure as the direct lunar damage formula, meaning it shares the same characteristics. Thus, direct stellar conduct damage doesn't apply any element and scales with the abilities multiplier and stat scaling, the base reaction damage buff coming from the stacks from the pole star field and from character passives, elemental mastery, stellar reaction damage bonus, but not normal damage bonus like elemental damage bonus, enemy elemental res but not their defense, elevation, and lastly the character's crit stats. With stellar conduct covered, let's go over Sandrone's main kit. Most of her damage comes from her charge attack. When you hold her charge attack down, she will summon her mecha, Fagio, to fire cryo attacks aiming in front of her. While Sandrone has radiant stellar conduct active, her charge attacks will continually fire 3 regular cryo hits, then 1 stellar conduct beam hit. While Sandrone is using her charge attack, she will continuously accumulate points called decoding power. She starts at 0 decoding power at the start of her charge attack, and when she reaches 100 decoding power after firing enough attacks, Fagio will enter power overdrive mode, dealing less damage, acting as an overheat mechanic. At C0, one whole charge attack from Sandrone can do 3 normal hits and 1 super conduct hit a total of 3 times before entering power overdrive mode. In order to exit power overdrive mode, you need to decrease decoding power from 100 to at least under 50, but in practice you'll want to decrease it back to 0. One option is swapping out of Sandrone to put her off field, but another option is using her elemental skill. Her skill makes her hover around and fire 2 attacks, one that does regular cryo damage and one that does stellar conduct damage when radiant stellar conduct is active. The skill also instantly reduces decoding power by 70 points, plus an additional 10 points for every 0.1 second she hovers with the skill. So Sandrone can use her charge attack until she enters power overdrive, then use her skill to completely reset her decoding power so she can use her full charge attack again, repeating this process however long you want since the skill has a 4-second cooldown. Sandrone's elemental burst does 3 hits of AoE cryo damage, then a final hit of stellar conduct damage when radiant stellar conduct is active. Lastly, her remaining passives just increase her damage. Her A1 passive has two parts in stellar conduct teams. The first part increases the stellar conduct damage from her skill if it is used when Sandrone has greater than 50 decoding points, which should always be the case if you play her correctly in combat. And the second part gives Sandrone stacks of refined tactics for every 10 decoding power that she reduces, up to a max of 10 stacks, and these stacks are all consumed when using her burst, causing it to deal more damage. And her A4 passive gives Sandrone additional elemental mastery based on her attack. With at least 2000 attack, she will get the max plus 160 EM. That's everything on Sandrone's base kit. In terms of talent leveling priority, all of Sandrone's talents contribute to her total damage, so ideally you level them all. But her charge attacks contribute most of her damage, followed by her burst, then her skill. So prioritize leveling her normal attack talent first, then her burst, then her skill. Regarding how to properly play Sandrone, she's fairly simple to play. All you do when she's on field is perform her full charge attack, use her skill when you start overheating, and repeat. You will typically end with her elemental burst every rotation since it does significant damage, but you can choose to use her burst earlier to fit it in some extra team buffs. Sandrone does have some cancels with her skill and is able to swap out of her burst quickly if used at the end to minimize rotation time, but they aren't that important to perform. Generally at C0, Sandrone will perform her full charge attack and skill a total of 3 times every rotation, but if you have her C1, you want to do it a total of 2 times. Speaking of her C1, let's now go over Sandrone's Constellations. C1 makes Sandrone's charge attack generate decoding power at a 50% lower rate. This makes her full charge attack deal double the amount of hits compared to C0, but also increases the time to perform the whole thing. Because of this, as mentioned earlier, with C1 you want to do 2 full charge attacks instead of 3. C1 also gives the team 30% increased stellar conduct damage while Sandrone is performing her charge attack. With Radiant Stellar Conduct, C2 increases the crit damage of Sandrone's stellar conduct beam hits, with subsequent beams getting a higher crit damage buff. C3 grants 3 normal attack talent levels. With C4, when Sandrone deals stellar conduct damage, she will periodically fire an additional coordinated attack that deals stellar conduct damage. C5 grants 3 burst talent levels, and lastly with C6, Sandrone will fire a continuous laser beam starting from the 3rd stellar conduct beam hit of her charged attack, and this laser beam adds 4 extra instances of stellar conduct damage on top of her original charge attack hits. It also gives Sandrone 20% elevation to her stellar conduct damage. Overall, Sandrone's Constellations aren't actually very good in terms of damage increase when comparing her Constellations with other modern DPSs, making it one of the biggest flaws in her kit. Her C6 is pretty strong, but her C1 and C2 are somewhat mediocre damage increases to the point where her C3, which simply increases her normal attack talent, is actually one of her better early Constellations. Consequently, if you're looking into early vertical investment for Sandrone, her Constellations should not be your first priority, as you should aim to get her signature weapon first. Speaking of her signature weapon, let's cover Sandrone's best build options. For weapons, her signature, a Teaspoon of Transcendence, is her clear best in slot. Crit damage substat, and the passive gives additional attack and a stacking stellar conduct damage buff after hitting enemies with charge attacks. All useful stats for Sandrone. For 5-star weapon alternatives, anything that gives stats like crit or attack are solid options, including Malwika's signature, Beacon, Wolf's Gravestone, Verdict, Redhorn, and the Unforged. For 4-star weapons, defaulting craftable Tidal Shadow is one of her best options since it gives a ton of extra attack, but use of its passive does require a healer on the team. The event weapon Mailed Flower is also a good choice since its passive doesn't require a healer and it gives attack and EM after Sandrone triggers an elemental reaction, both useful stats for her. Lastly, the Melusine Claymore can be useful as well, mainly in teams where Sandrone needs more energy recharge to help her burst every rotation. Here is a complete weapon comparison made by MeowTews ranking Sandrone's best Claymore options. Feel free to pause to take a closer look at the details. For artifacts, Sandrone is a stellar conduct DPS, so her clear best set will be 4-piece disenchantment. 2-piece gives attack, and the 4-piece gives stellar conduct damage percent and crit rate. There are other set options like 4-piece gilded and 2-piece 2-piece sets, but 4-piece disenchantment is significantly ahead for damage, so just use 4-piece disenchantment. For main stats, Sandrone wants attack hourglass, attack goblet, and crit circlet. No cryo damage goblet because regular damage percent doesn't increase stellar conduct damage. If you have a good elemental mastery hourglass or goblet, you can use 1 EM and 1 attack main stat. And if you're using an attack buffer like Nicole, 1 EM and 1 attack main stat will be better than double attack main stat. For substats, Sandrone wants energy recharge, crit, attack, and EM. Sandrone's burst deals significant damage, so you want to use her burst every rotation. Depending on the team Sandrone's in, she may want to build no additional ER or may need up to around 130 ER. For a more detailed look into Sandrone's energy requirements, MeowTews made a table showcasing Sandrone's energy requirements in a bunch of different team compositions, along with a differing number of Favonius weapon users on the team, so feel free to pause to take a look at the table's details. Finally, let's go over Sandrone's best team comps on her release patch Luna 8. Because the stellar conduct reaction incentivizes constant electro and cryo application to maintain a high number of pulsar field stacks for a higher team damage buff, Sandrone wants at least one electro and one cryo all fielder in her teams, with the last slot being open for a flex support. In patch Luna 8, the newly buffed Yai is by far the strongest electro all-fielder for Sandrone, as she does a ton of all-field stellar conduct damage herself and provides team buffs with Constellations, which is available to select for free with the Stella Fortuna event. For the all-field cryo support, both Escoffier and the newly buffed Chi-Chi are solid options. Even outside of full freeze teams, Escoffier does provide a little bit of cryo res shred and brings decent all-field damage, and Chi-Chi provides stellar conduct team buffs and is a powerful healer, getting even stronger as a support with her C6. C6 Diona is also a decent alternative. For the final support slot, you have a lot of options. Going double all-field cryo by using Escoffier and Chi-Chi together is a very strong option, as the increased cryo application enables high cryo resonance uptime. Another good support option is Nicole. Even though Nicole doesn't have all-field cryo or electro application, meaning a little less pulsar field stacks for the team, she's still a good support because of her team-wide attack buff and her strong shield. You can also use Shilonin, as even though she also doesn't help with pulsar field stack generation, her res shred is very valuable, along with her using 4-piece instructors, since the EM buff is better than 4-piece scrolls elemental damage percent buff for stellar conduct teams. The newly buffed C6 Beidou is also a solid choice, since her burst now gives a ton of buffs in stellar conduct teams, and her shield is useful. Lastly, Sucrose can be a strong option for Sandrone with proper 4-piece Viridescent Venera setup, being able to shred both cryo and electro res, plus give elemental mastery to the team. While Sandrone has a good amount of team options, the one key constant is Yai as the off-field electro. If you don't have Yai, you can use characters like C6 Beidou or Fischl as alternative electro supports. However, because the buffed Yai is incredibly powerful in stellar conduct teams, Sandrone teams without Yai will deal significantly lower damage, and realistically, the best solution for Yai-less teams is to rely on the new stellar supports like the releasing in Snezhnaya. With Sandrone being Genshin's first stellar character, new characters in Snezhnaya are almost certainly going to release that will expand on the archetype and provide a major buff to Sandrone's teams. Yai-less teams will likely get much better with new characters being strong alternatives to Yai, but for Sandrone's current best teams with Yai, it is very likely that Yai remains on the teams that she's so strong, and the cryo and flex supports like Escoffier, Chi-Chi, and Nicole get replaced first. Lastly, for all the Yuri enjoyers, you can play Sandrone in a team with Columbina, mainly with electro units like Yai and Anefa for a team that triggers both stellar conduct and lunar charged. 4-piece Night of the Skies Unveiling on Sandrone is about equal to 4-piece Disenchantment here. This team is not going to be better than Sandrone's main ideal stellar conduct teams, but it will function fine. To conclude this Sandrone guide, here is my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Even without the inevitable new stellar supports releasing in Snezhnaya, Sandrone is still a top meta DPS in patch Luna 8. In her best teams on her release, which just rely on older existing supports, Sandrone is looking to be on par with some of the lunar DPSs, Varka and Malwika without advanced combos. This damage level is already top tier on its own, but what makes Sandrone's power level scary in terms of power creep is that she's already top meta damage wise without any new characters from Snezhnaya. When looking at her current best teams, the only teammate who is likely to remain on the team is Yai, since her buffs made her very strong in stellar conduct teams, but the other 2 party slots can very easily be improved with newer characters. Thus, Sandrone is likely to get 2 major buffs with 2 new supports, and even if we disregard her DPS, Sandrone is still a stellar conduct character, meaning she will be useful and meta relevant against any upcoming shield that HOYOverse creates for stellar reactions. But that doesn't mean Sandrone is overpowered or an absolute must pull, as she does have some noteworthy flaws. First, while her charge attack does give interruption resistance, she may still get interrupted against aggressive enemies, increasing the importance of shields on the team, a problem which could get easily addressed with new supports. Second, Sandrone's early vertical investment isn't very strong. For instance, her C1 and C2 are pretty mediocre in terms of damage increase, which limits her damage potential at higher investment, especially compared to other DPSs who gain more damage with vertical investment. For instance, even though Wriothesley as the cryo-stellar conduct DPS does significantly less damage than Sandrone at C0, Wriothesley's Constellations are very strong, allowing a C2 Wriothesley for instance to close the damage gap versus a C2 Sandrone. New supports may have strong Constellations to compensate for this, but that doesn't necessarily change the fact that Sandrone's Constellations aren't that big of a damage increase compared to other modern DPS early Constellations. And third, Sandrone teams are heavily dependent on Yai for their high damage potential. If you don't have Yai, Sandrone teams deal significantly less damage, and because of Sandrone's overall overall weaker vertical investment options, getting her Constellations or signature weapon won't completely close the damage gap. In fact, pulling C0 Yai plus getting her C1 for free from the Stellar Fortuna event will be a higher damage increase for Sandrone than pulling her signature weapon. Yai for Sandrone is like Anefa for Flynn's, but in this comparison, Yai is much more important for Sandrone's damage than Anefa is for Flynn's damage. New supports will very likely make Yai less important for Sandrone since you have new options, so don't feel pressured to pull Yai just for Sandrone, but unless Yai gets completely replaced by a new support, which currently seems unlikely, Yai will remain a key support for Sandrone. Ultimately, Sandrone is a very strong DPS with the right teams on her release and will very likely get much stronger with the release of new characters in Sneznaya. However, we won't truly know how powerful Sandrone will end up becoming until much later, so we'll just have to wait and see what Sneznaya releases in the near future. That's everything I wanted to cover about Sandrone. A big thanks and shout out to theorycrafters Jaxon, MeowTews, and Talah who allowed me to reference their calcs in this video. They put in a lot of hard work and helped me a ton with this guide, so I appreciate them a ton. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Sandrone. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or click the subscribe button for more Genshin guide and analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions you have in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Sandrone pulls.